Okay, everybody, welcome back to our next session, another session on patient lived experiences. My name is Joe Pantginis, Managing Director at HC Wainwright for the third annual Spinal Cord Injury Symposium, and very happy to have with us yet again Jerod and Hanna Nieder. And again, thank you so much for being here. Sorry we're not in person this year. It's always great to hang out and have these discussions, but I'm glad we can provide further input and discussion today. So again, thank you for being here.
Of course, good to see you.
You too, you too. So Jerod and Hanna, look, I want to be able to take off a little bit from last year's discussions. A key focus or topic that came up was PFDD, or patient-focused drug development. But before, well, I guess it all has to do with that. Before I get into a lot of the personal questions around, your ongoing care and lifestyle or what have you, there was an interesting topic that came up when I had my discussion with Robert Paler. And this has to do with choices that SCI patients have initially at the time of injury, soon after, but specifically longer term. So once you become, say, stable in, post-therapy and your current functions and ongoing therapy, the comment that came up was patients might be a little more tentative after the longer term, once they're stable, to try new therapies, because of, not necessarily knowing the risk-benefit profiles. So I'm curious where you guys stand on that. Just going right into some of the controversy.
Yeah. No, I totally get why people would be like that. This injury shakes you, and once you kind of find out how to navigate things, it could be scary to try to take another leap and go into something else. But I feel that it's very important that the way most of us are asked to live after injury is unacceptable. And the only way that you're going to change that is by helping with the research moving forward.
Got it. Hanna, I don't know if you wanted to add. Yep.
Sure. I think another aspect of that is, after injury, a lot of times families are just figuring out how to survive. And so that's dealing with insurance, that's moving back home, potentially modifying the home as well. So there's a lot of steps to it. So sometimes it's just like, where should I focus? And so you're just going step by step by step. And then you don't really have time to do this like research into this brand new world of trials and drug development. So it's just a lot to take on. So maybe that's why some people do wait a couple years or so, I don't know, whatever timeline to start researching that.
Yeah. And I do think there's a lot of distrust, where we've constantly been told that, oh, in 5 or 10 years, you're going to expect something great, and nothing's happened. And there's a lot of people that I talk to that are just like, I don't believe that anything's going to happen. So why would I waste my time?
Got it. And that's helpful. And you said various components that even over the longer term, and we're going to get into these now, impact your lives and your decisions about whether you wanted to, say, potentially try new things. So I appreciate that feedback. So again, more to the specifics here. Some of my questions are going to be pretty broad, and I'll wait for you to get into the details. We've discussed some of these things before, but I think they're extremely important to constantly bring up and harp on, if you will. So with regard to the day-to-day living, and I'm eventually want to link this to research. First, can you talk about a bit of the costs involved, the hours that go into things. How do you find help post-injury? How do you engage? What kind of help you want to do? And, that's a broad concept, obviously, but I know you have specifics, and then we'll link that to sort of the research components.
Yeah, well, I mean, the care is several hours every day. And, I'm lucky that I become independent enough to where I can basically put myself to bed at the end of the day. But it's not just the care that I need in the morning, every morning, going to the bathroom, getting dressed. It's not just those things. It's all the things that I can't do that really accumulate. I'm not helping out with dishes very much. I can load the laundry machine, but I'm not very good at putting it in the dryer and all these other things. So it all really accumulates, because it's more than just the care that I need. It's the normal things that I don't do that a normal partner would do.
Yeah, day-to-day activities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, care looks very much like I help Jerod get out of bed and transfer him to a shower chair in the morning. And then from there, we do a bowel routine. So during bowel routine, that's when I start getting ready as well. So, I'm kind of juggling both. But after bowel routine, we now have a roll-in shower. So, we just modified it to be a roll-in shower, but now we can push him into a shower so he can rinse off. Then he gets dressed and I help him transfer into his power wheelchair. And from there, I'm very lucky because he is rather independent. And right now, since we've recently moved, he has been really enjoying grocery shopping. So that's an added benefit that I found. I used to do all the grocery shopping and now he likes to manage that. So it's not only the physical act of going to the grocery store, but also then managing the grocery list and populating that, updating it. So I think that's really wonderful. It's something that I completely have checked out of, and I don't even know what we have in the pantry, honestly. So he manages what we have for our meals. But then when you ask about cost of things, so what I just explained to you takes us about maybe an hour and a half, because I'm the one that's doing it every single day. We've gotten very efficient at it. However, if you were to hire care, there's several different ways to do this, but if you were to hire somebody privately, that means just finding somebody yourself that is not with an agency. You can maybe have them come for those 1 to 2 hours, and you can dictate how many hours they are here, how much you will pay them. Mind you, the pay probably starts around $20 to $25 bare minimum. And then, you can also try to get them to do different tasks. So for our bowel program specifically, we use medication as a suppository. That is vital for the next aspect. So you can have them, insert the suppository, do all that. Now, next step, if you were to go through an agency, you are mandated for 4 hours minimum. And that's oftentimes what you see. And so 4 hours minimum, you're thinking, okay, if you need help in the morning, there's 4 hours. If you need help in the evening, that's a total of 8 hours per day of mandated hours that you need if you need 2 people. Plus, if you have medication, like a suppository is considered medication, you need a then full nurse to administer that medication. So oftentimes you're like, well, you have to have the care attendant plus a nurse to administer the said medication. So it's like, okay, so is there a minimum number of hours for the nurse as well? Can the nurse just be the attendant? So there's all those additional costs. Of course, this also is different if you're a veteran. You have, different protocols. A lot of care can be funded as well. So there are benefits to that. But yeah, there's those 3 primary aspects of how people get care. And or I guess 4, because if you have a spouse that's doing it for free, like us, that's the 4th aspect. But yeah, I think,
hint, Jerod.
Yes. And a lot of times spouses can't be paid as a caregiver. That's our case. We just moved to Colorado and we learned that caregivers can be spouses. So
Can be paid.
Caregivers can be spouses and also be paid. But yeah, so that's something we might look into. But again, we might not be approved for that service. So you never know. There's a lot of fine print there. It's very costly for sure.
Got it. And just a little side comment, and being a little self-deprecating, for the males of the world, Jerod gets the gold star for actually helping put laundry in the machine, what have you. So in the first, so that's good. So just out of curiosity, Hanna, with everything you described and what have you, it's like, how does that work with insurance? And, how does it come down, for you and many of the other people you talk to in these situations, with regard to out-of-pockets as well?
I mean, insurance is always a battle. Even as an able-bodied person, insurance is a battle. And so it's like a full-time job. And I honestly, when we mentor people through Jerod's platform, it's oftentimes, how do I pay for all of this? And what insurance do you have specifically? And why is it that they're paying? And a lot of times it's like, they're not paying. Unfortunately, like I'm doing all the care that's on an added expense. We also locate ourselves so we don't require transportation. Luckily, we have a van, which we bought used, but transportation is oftentimes $150 each way. So if you have an appointment, you're paying that. Sometimes you can find transportation for $75, but that's not often the case.
And that's out of pocket.
Out of pocket. All of these are out of pocket expenses. So for insurance to cover caregiving, very rare. For you to be on disability and have a waiver program that covers caregiving, a little bit more common, but not super common. And then again, if you're a veteran, you have other programs that can assist. But a lot of these are out of pocket expenses.
And a lot of times there are, state funded or city run transportation options.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use those, like one doctor's appointment is going to take you all day. By the time you wait for the ride, there's other people, in the smaller van with you. Then it can eat your whole day very easily.
Okay. So definitely areas for improvement, not only for SCI patients, but for across the board, which is problems the country faces. That's a whole other topic of discussion. So I guess that's a good segue with regard to, again, if you could describe, and we'll get into some specifics, the continuum that you've had with regard to, the acute phases of your injury, getting into different therapeutic protocol or protocols, and then early on research that you would go through, maybe general, and then I have some specific questions.
My protocol early on was, I was lucky enough to go to Craig Hospital here in Denver. And what I would do, honestly, is I would come here and see what the coolest therapy that they had going on. And then I would try to copy it in my garage. I was very lucky that I had a private insurance policy that stated unlimited therapy. So I was able to have a very rigorous therapy schedule. But that was my approach, was trying to, Craig was viewed as the best, still is in many people's eyes, and just trying to copy that in order to stay busy and give myself the best chance at a healthy life. What was the other part of the question?
No, just building into, we'll do it now, just building into the research aspect. But actually, the fact that you mentioned Craig, I think is very important, because Robert was also near Craig at the time. So how close to Craig were you at the time of your injury? Because of course, a lot of these components are, how quickly you could get into surgery or stabilization surgery or what have you.
Yeah, so I was actually injured in Mexico, and I had to have my stabilization surgery down there. But I was living in Lawrence, Kansas, which is 550 miles away from here. But I was lucky enough, we just did a lot of research, and this was viewed as one of the top places, along with Shepherd Center and Shirley Ryan. But we were lucky enough to be able to come here. It was closest to my hometown in Lawrence.
No, that's great. So, based on the comments you were talking about your daily lifestyle, I was hoping to, and I will pepper you with a few questions, but how some of these daily life components that you've discussed, how they might impact, once you're going to your assessments, your physical therapy, even though you've had a lot of that replicated at your home, for example, and, taking part in research. So one example that we've discussed and you brought up now is, your morning routine, your morning bowel routine, for example, takes a certain amount of time. You have something like that. What about, how you slept the night before, other components that it might impact when you go either for therapy or more specifically, research components where they have to make assessments, in progress, as an example. What kind of impacts do you see there?
That is a real challenge, I think, when you're talking about research with this population, because how I present, how I perform day to day can vary greatly. And the things you mentioned, how I've slept, how my bowel program went, those things have a huge impact on it. My hydration levels, what I've eaten. And I do think that that's an added challenge with research. And I think I actually think there need to be extra steps taken to track those things so we can get a better idea of that, because at living it every day, it's tough for me to wrap my head around how all those things impact me. Something as simple as the weather. I feel like a crazy old man, but when high pressure or low pressure storms move through, it seriously affects my body. So that is definitely a challenge with research.
No, for sure. Hanna, I don't know if there's, how you feel those impacts.
Yeah, I could definitely tell when Jerod hasn't slept well, and then depending on what he's eaten, his nutrition, the bowel program can be different. So he's eating very healthy since we moved to Colorado, and I can definitely tell. He's having really, sorry, TMI, but really good bowel movements. And I think that sets like the standard for the day. He's not bloated. He's feeling good. He doesn't have as much AD after the program because the movements were good and clear. So I think a lot of that has to be taken into consideration. Also, hydration could then directly relate to UTIs. Are you having UTI symptoms? How much caffeine did you have in the morning? All of these can, affect your blood pressure and affect just how you present and how you perform.
No, perfect. I appreciate that. And I guess more to the specifics now, because you talk about the logistics of things. So when you're actually at site, talk about the accommodations. I know that's a very broad concept because, again, this is patient-focused drug delivery, the concept we're talking about here. How amenable or how in tune are these sites with the actual patients versus just measuring how much you can raise your arm?
Unfortunately, most of these places are just in the real world, which aren't really built for us. Starting a lot of times from the time that things are scheduled, not taking into account what our morning does look like. And then when I get there to the study, a lot of times it's physical pen and paper they want you to fill out for things. Bathrooms typically aren't very accessible, even if there's a lot of space. Getting in and out, is there an opener, and then is there enough space? Lunchrooms, things like that. The cafeterias typically aren't that accessible. Luckily, there's super kind people everywhere to help you out. But as far as being independent, in my experience, most of these places present a lot of challenges.
I think the temperature is definitely one.
Fact. Yeah.
So how hospitals are oftentimes rather cold. Jerod doesn't temperature regulate. So when he's cold, he's also not performing at his best.
Great point.
No, that totally is.
And but sorry, not to cut you off, but it's funny because some people run very, very hot. So, I don't know if you can find the perfect temperature, but a way to at least understand that and set maybe a medium. And then being able to regulate the temperature, maybe by the fans or by the neck heaters, who knows?
Okay, and that's very helpful. And I was remembering something, when you and I were having sort of a personal discussion, even before you get to the hospital, factors around scheduling just seem to be highly variable and how that might impact your life.
Yeah. A lot of times with research, there's not a lot of available time slots, and I understand that logistically it's a nightmare. You have a bunch of researchers, a bunch of people that it takes to do this, but also, if we have a conflict with our schedule or with doctor's appointments or things like that, you almost have to prioritize research because there's so many moving parts there. So there are challenges with that for sure.
But I think sometimes with research that Jerod's been in, they try to give you a time slot. So you have a designated time slot that you're in, but then of course there's cancellations and then things get moved. So oftentimes you find that the schedule varies, and oftentimes that happens during the week as well. So every day almost I'm like, what's your schedule like? Just because you never know when things may change, but that also makes it very difficult to schedule other aspects of your life.
And if your schedule's not going well, and say, oh, you're running 30 minutes late, well, maybe that doesn't work for the research team, and then you miss that session, and then that can really throw off the whole study, if you're not being there consistent in those things. So it really is challenging.
Yeah.
That the way you describe that to me is actually a perfect segue to the question of how do we merge? And again, this is I'm going to end up this conversation by asking you really what's needed and needs to be improved upon, and you've been already addressing that in a lot of good ways. But how do we merge the two things of, okay, the researchers, they care about the research. It's for the research. I think that was a quote of yours, a year or two ago, for the knowledge, but not the patient. How do we end up merging the two of those things?
I was going to say, I think sometimes, because researchers are very good, their minds are like molecule or neuro pathway driven, but I also think it'd be great for them to just live in the life a little bit. A lot of times your patients do need help with care. And I don't know if that's too much of a boundary line to cross, but having that experience and doing the care, understanding what it's like, because you're dealing with this population day in and day out. Everybody requires different levels of care, but maybe participating, maybe not with your patients, but with the population, there's always people looking for caregivers. I've seen that be a good way of understanding, the nitty gritty of what the day-to-day looks like. And then also having, then more empathy and understanding with your population that you're working with.
Yeah. And then I know studies have to be very standardized. We're trying to get good data. But I think some sort of a hybrid model between that and the therapy that's completely customized and tailored to you, if we can find some things, like temperature and time of day, things to make it easier on the participant, somewhat tailored research studies, make it work for the individual so you can get the data that you need efficiently and accurately.
Things that you've described, temperature, bowel programs, all the things that you described, take away from your word of standardization.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
I think there's an area of deep needs for improvement there. So when you talk about your specifics, and I think this applies to so many different patients, I think, look, on the macro level, it was always like, okay, what's going to be the best thing for SCI patients is like, you're going to have your injury, you're going to get some sort of therapy, and you're just going to get up and walk again and go back to your normal lives. Just the whole, stem cells are going to cure or whatever therapy, Neuralink is going to do what have you. There've been some great advances. But in the day-to-day lives, what have been some of your key improvements from a quality of life standpoint that you can look back to that impact patients? And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize are extremely important.
Blood pressure.
Blood pressure. I was going to say from my research experience, I have far less UTIs now, and my bowel program is a lot quicker. And those are day-to-day things that have really improved my quality of life. I was a chronic UTI sufferer and a much longer bowel program. But absolutely, blood pressure regulation is huge. I was one of the people that was passing out for the first year or two after my injury. So to be able to regulate that now has been.
And I just remember you used to rock yourself a lot more frequently during meals than you do now. I remember, I used to watch him do it, trying to understand like how that was helping him. But I just recently realize that you don't do that really as much. So yeah.
Fidgeting around, helps me maintain my blood pressure. And when I start getting low, I get real fidgety. And yeah.
So that, based on last year, it seems like there's been an improvement, like a very big improvement, because, you even discussed that about, you're leaning forward or backwards to help that as you might feel yourself going down a little bit. So I'm hearing, and I'm also seeing that there's been improvements in that. Is that,
Yeah.
I think there's always, fine tuning.
What led to that?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and
how,
it's not like a complete fix. I think you're working with like your current situation because of UTIs, his blood pressure probably wasn't as spiked based on what you're eating. I don't know. It's like, it has to be everything, which is why we always laugh. Everything has to be perfect for him to perform at his best, as is with any able-bodied person. But it just affects you more. So if you were to like drink the night before, tonight, if we're eating dinner, he might be rocking a little bit more because, you know, blood pressure isn't at the peak levels.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. We joke that I'm the princess that slept on a pea. You know, one little thing can just throw everything off.
But to your point, there is, you know, improvements that continue happening. It did happen overnight, and there were fine tunes to, you know, the different programming that Jerod uses. But I do think it's something that it's visible from day one to now.
For sure.
No, perfect. And look, I think these are really fantastic pieces of feedback here. And, you know, just considering the time here, I'm going to end up, again, going back to PFDD. The question that I'm going to ask you, and I keep asking these questions with regard to research or therapy, you know, your exercises or what have you ever been asked for your input? I'll just go right there first. Like versus do this exercise versus how do you feel, Jerod?
Oh.
Did you have a bad night?
Sometimes in therapy, it's like, you know, well, what do you want to do today?
I do think they ask for your feedback a lot.
Yeah. No, my feedback has been something, and it's something that I've noticed that has been more incorporated as the years have gone on. So yeah, yes, I do think when appropriate, but a lot of times they ask your information at the end, you know, like, how did we do? What do you think of things? And maybe if we did it at the beginning, well, I guess you can't really give feedback at the beginning, but maybe like halfway through to check in, something like that would be good.
Yeah, I think maybe Jerod's a little bit different because he kind of created a reputation for himself. He had participated in so many research studies that he was well known for giving really good feedback and being able to fine tune the feedback to different aspects of like where it was in his body and how his body was feeling. One of the researchers said that he was like an F1 driver. So he could like tell you what's going on with the car and his body being a car.
I appreciated that comment.
Yes. So, but I do think they do ask for feedback often. I just wish they'd considered, you know, more aspects of the life that goes into, you know, than the performance.
Okay.
That's a good point. Yeah. It was more solely focused on what we were doing. And I think more information on what's going on at home could really help everybody.
Yeah. Like, did you have coffee this morning? Did you eat breakfast this morning? Have you already worked out today? Did you do a bowel program? Some people don't do a bowel program every day. So I wonder how that would affect their performance day to day. So yeah, all kinds of information like that would be really cool from my like analytical mind to see.
Yeah. Track all that data.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, that's very encouraging to hear. Definitely see the needs that still exist. But look, I don't want to overstate this, but I think even from the first time we had this conference, you know, a couple of years ago now, I'm hearing levels of improvement with regard to soliciting feedback. And I think that's important. We're nowhere near where we need to be, but I am hearing encouraging things from you. And I hope that applies to many other patients as well, with centers asking them, how did we do? How did you feel? What, you know, what have you? So I'd love to think that there's some nice read through and that conferences like that help to boost that visibility, you know, for patients and their needs. But the day-to-day stuff, I think there's definitely, you know, continuing need for. So sorry for my little long-winded, you know, speech there, because I think it's extremely important. But I want to thank you very much for your feedback. Thank you for your participation again, and you know, all the best, you know, continuing in your therapies and what have you. So thank you again, Jerod and Hanna.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's good to see you again.